Hello, Wednesday night, Twitch, Green Oaks Gaming. I'm Joe, here to do some inspirations. We're going to build a character from a miniature. This is our Wednesday night program, 8 Central Standard Time. We're going to continue this on as part of our new schedule. This is week 3 that we are conducting this show. We hope more people find it and find it interesting and entertaining in the same regard. You can see on the desk there I have a miniature. I have a sheet that is not a player character sheet, and I also have the monster manual that you can see. So the reason that I've got those laid out is this miniature that I picked out is a monster. We're going to be looking at it from a GM's perspective on building a character to use in games, and this is not going to be for a player character. So it's going to be a little bit different. Before we jump into it, I just want to rehash again what our schedule is. Monday, 8 Central Standard Time, we have a show called The Journey. This is talking about exploring and world building. Last week, we just started a new process of building a campaign setting based off of a gaming world. We're going to keep diving in on that going forward. Tuesday, we have Pursuing a Passion, Honest Reviews. So generally, Tammy joins me for our Honest Reviews Tuesdays at 8 Central Standard Time. If you want to have different reviews of all things related to RPGs and RPG gaming, make sure you tune in on Tuesday nights. Wednesday, of course, tonight, 8 Central Standard Time, Inspirations, Character Building from a Miniature. This show is all about doing it backwards and doing it in a fun and interesting way. Rather than building a character and searching out a miniature that fits that character, we're going to find a cool miniature that gives us some inspiration to then build a character based off that miniature sculpt. Thursdays, we do not have a live show because that is our game night. Friday at 8:30 Central Standard Time, we have the Adventure Log. That's just weekly updates. And then Saturdays, starting at noon Central Standard Time, painting. We just call it Bringing It to Life, miniature painting. So it's just raw, in the studio painting, talking about all things that come to mind and come up in questions while we're painting in the studio. So that's it on our calendar. Again, we're in week 3 of this new schedule. And tonight's is going to be an exciting one. The screen is set up like this for a reason because we want to focus on the studio table. So real quick, I'm going to talk about the miniature. This is from Reaper Bones 5 Kickstarter. So this was part of the Reaper Bones 5 Kickstarter. You can see this beautiful sculpt. And yes, it is a beautiful sculpt. Look at how horrific some of those details are in this zombie giant. It's got vultures, one on its shoulder, one on its head, one by its feet. It's got ratty clothing. It's got missing eye. It's got busted teeth with a gaping maw. It's got ribs showing. It looks horrific. It's got almost like boils and rotting flesh. And it's got a bent club because I have not yet done a boil on this to straighten everything out for bones. I generally boil some water and then dip it in there, let it sit for a couple of minutes, pull it out, and good to go. But yes, an absolutely beautiful, beautiful sculpt. Look at that, some stitching on its skin. I mean, just absolutely gorgeous. Splinted leg from a previous break, but a horrific visage. Now we could go the easy route and say that this is a frost giant miniature and go to the Explorer's Guide to Wild Mount, where they have the stats for a frost giant zombie. We could go that route and have our monster be a frost giant zombie. However, I like to turn things on their head sometimes, because what if my players have the Player's Guide to Wild Mount and they know the stats and they're anticipating it and they build all their tactics around the table on fighting a frost giant zombie based on the book stats. So that's the whole reason I created this page for my own personal tabletop use. If you are a patron, you can download this for free as well on our website. Now, one thing I do different here is I use a pen. Now, I'm going to start with a pencil, but I'm going to use a pen as well, because ultimately when I build this stat block, I want to be able to come back to it, and even if I write things in pencil as I'm playing at the table, I've got the stats and everything in pen so I can reuse them. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is open the monster manual, and I'm going to put a little placeholder, and I just happen to have a little bit of parchment paper. I'm going to tear this in two. The reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to go to two spots. I want to find the giants, which here we are, frost giant. I'm going to put one marker in there, then to throw this on its head, because as I looked at this undead beastly thing, one of the monsters my party is currently, in contestation with is a lich who is trying to raise a Draco-lich. And I thought, you know what? What better way to throw my party for a loop than to have this figure, while I can still use it as a zombie frost giant, but what if this were a frost giant who was a lich and not a zombie? You could also use it as a frost giant who became a ghoul. You could use it as a frost giant who's become a number of different undeads. But I thought a lich. So here's what got me thinking about that. As I was looking at the miniature not too long ago, you can see I use placeholders quite a bit when I am looking up creature stats. As I was looking at the miniature and thinking about, what turned this guy into a zombie, it started dawning on me, for liches, generally they're all humans. And why wouldn't something else want to attain more knowledge and magic and longer life? So with frost giants as our example, because it is a frost giant, they're in freezing lands beyond civilization. You've got the whole stat block here. They're very much brute strength above all else. So imagine a frost giant who goes against the clan and the ordning and moves into lichdom. So that's kind of what inspired me to build this. So what I'm going to do is actually in pen at the top, I'm going to write what I want this stat block to be. And in this case, this is going to be a frost giant lich. And I'm going to use most parts from the frost giant stats. So the size is going to be a huge giant. And then for its alignment, whether or not you play with alignment, we'll make a determination a little bit. So I'm going to compare that neutral evil to any evil alignment. That's key. Any evil alignment. And I'm going to slide this up so we can see the stat block in the camera a little bit easier. Got to adjust a little bit here because I'm not set up for having the book further up. But there we start to get into the stats that we can see. So, neutral evil fits fine. Now the cool thing about this, as you're making a monster like this, is your players, of course, will not be aware of the stats. So that can be a very strong positive. That can be an extremely strong positive, just because you are able to really challenge them and what they know from any type of metagaming. So here's where I'm going to switch to pencil. So for the Frost Giant, I'm going to take down some stats first. Armor class is generally 15, and that's due to patchwork. Hit points. Now this is funky the way I do this. So I put the average, and then I also put the maximum. What are the maximum hit points that this creature can have? Just because for me, if I need to scale the combat up or down, either way, having that maximum and the average, I can scale it according to what I may need on the table. So I'm going to just pop open my calculator, because my math teacher said it's not like I would ever have a calculator in my pocket. And guess what? Now that we've got cells with calculators built in, we sure showed them. All right, so I've got the average and the maximum speed of 40 feet. Strength, so don't get mad at me. I'm old school. We've got a 23 and plus 6. Dexterity is 9, minus 1. Constitution, 21, plus 5 for that modifier. Intelligence, 9 of minus 1. Wisdom, 10. And then charisma, a 12, which is a plus 1 modifier. Now, for the... You can see this does not follow the exact line of the stat block, but that's okay. So I always write any saving throws off to the side. Save on Constitution is plus 8. Save on Wisdom is a plus 3. And save on Charisma is a plus 4. Skills, we've got Athletics, plus 9, and Perception, plus 3. They are immune to cold. Senses, passive perception of 13. Languages, giant. And then I usually put up here the CR of 8 for 3,900 XP. And then their actions, I'm hoping that's still showing up okay. 2 Great Axe. And then the Great Axe is melee at plus 9 to hit, 10-foot reach, and a hit is 3d12 plus 6. Now I write that out rather than the average because I always roll dice for the damage. And then slashing. And then they can also throw a rock. So this is the ranged. This is also plus 9 to hit. The range is 60 and 240 feet. And then this is going to be 4d10 plus 6 bludgeon. All right. So we've got the stats off the Frost Giant. Now I'm going to switch it. Drop my pen onto the Lich. Now, this is where we start blending some of the things. So our Frost Giant Lich is a huge giant who is undead. Now that's important for Divine and anything that could possibly turn it. Now here we can see the armor class of a Lich is 17. You can see the Frost Giant had a 15. And the armor class of the Lich as a 17 is natural armor. So we're actually going to go with 17. Natural. Now as I'm finalizing things, I'm putting them in pen. I can go back over and erase the pencil without having anything going on. Excuse me. Now, their hit points are extremely close. Look at that. Their average is 135. Our average is 138. Let's check their maximum just to check. That's 18d8 plus 54. So their maximum is 198, very close to our 204. So I'm actually going to stick with the higher 138 and 204. Now, as I'm using this in game, what I do is I subtract and just using the pencil, pop out what the updates are as I'm subtracting those hit points from the creature as it's being hit and attacked by the party members. So speed, a lich is 30. Because of the size, we're going to stick with 40 feet for the giant. Now here's where we start really having to think. We've got to really contemplate the blend of stats. So for a lich, your standard strength is 11. For the frost giant, it's 23. We have to think that a lich, if it were a human, right, the average for a human is 10, so it's a little bit stronger than a human. So I'm going to stick with the frost giant because its physical characteristics have stayed pretty much the same. Now you could argue because of its undeath, it's not going to be as strong as a regular frost giant, right? It started to wither away. Maybe it's not walking as much because it's studying. It's not swinging its axe. It's not out on the frozen tundra trudging through the snow and the winds. So you could make the argument that its strength could actually have gone down, and I'm okay with that. I'm actually going to bring this down to a 22, which still leaves us +6. Now dexterity on the frost giant was 9. On a lich, it's 16. Much more dexterous. Much more dexterous. So when we come into one where we've got huge discrepancies like that, we have to start thinking, do we go with the lich stat or the giant stat? Now in this case, I'm going to err more on the physicality of the frost giant. However, because of the undeath, it is going to increase it a little bit. So we'll make that one's dexterity a 10, which is going to have us a modifier of 0. Now constitution for your lich, you're at 16. And with the frost giant, you're at 21. I'm going to stick with the frost giant. That's a very physical trait. So 21 plus 5, meaning our save is going to stay +8. Now intelligence, here's the biggest difference. For a lich, you've got an intelligence of 20. For a frost giant, you've got 9. Now you have to think for the lich to study and learn the ways of the spell casting that they're going to do and to learn how to basically cheat death, so to say. They have to have a strong intelligence. So for that one, I'm going to pick the lich at 20 plus 5. Now wisdom, your lich is a 14, which has a modifier of +2. Your frost giant has a 10. Now wisdom is definitely a kind of more intellectual, maybe not intellectual, that's not the right word. Wisdom is wisdom. It's being wise. Our frost giant at a 10, I'm actually going to keep it there. So that modifier is going to be a 0, and its save is going to save as a +3. Now the reason I'm okay sticking with some of these lower ones is because I'm blending high from frost giant, high from lich, high from frost giant, low, low, and then when we get to charisma, now the lich has a 16, the frost giant has a 12 for charisma. I am actually going to stick with the frost giant's 12 at a +1, keeping the save +4. Now the lich does have much stronger saving throws, so Your constitution would be a +8. Your intelligence a +2. Your wisdom +9. Part of that is because the CR rating is so much different. You can see for the frost giant was an 8. For a lich, it's a 21. So how do you reconcile those? Part of it is because they have such better saving throws and everything. They're basically leveled up comparatively, right? So the saving throws we may have to go through and adjust as we level this character up. But let's go into the skills. The Lich is definitely Arcana, History, Insight, and Perception. Basically, if you were to think of any of these, you would add 6 to it. So for the skills, we took down the strength and we slightly increased the dex. But athletics I'm going to keep. And this will actually increase to a +12. Now our perception will increase to a +9. We will add Arcana, which will go to a +16. And then we are going to add Insight, which will be a +9. Now they are already immune to cold, but they will also have resistances as an undead. Resistant to, and I'm just going to add in lightning and necrotic. And then their immunities. Cold stays because of the frost giant rather than being resistant. It is now immune. But also poison and non-magic, pierce, slash, and bludgeon damage. Now, it also has condition immunities. So I'm going to put those under the senses. Immune to, and this is going to be charmed, exhausted, frightened, paralyzed, and poisoned. And then its senses, aside from its passive perception, which now jumps up to 19, we also have true sight, 120 feet. Now, as a lich, it has common plus 5 other languages. We've already got giant, common. Let's say for arcanic research, they also have elven. And let's say they have draconic. And how about deep speech? So one more. I'm going to choose primordial because I love to use primordial in a campaign. Think about where you're locating it, what some of your common themes are, some of the history of what your location is. Look for ways to tie it in. Maybe because primordial is not very commonly used, things that this lich has scribed are going to be in primordial so that no one else can steal its work. Now here you can see in tactics, I have an area that I just put tactics. Now, depending on the creature I'm doing, I put that as tactics because sometimes they'll have, like charging attacks or things like this. So in this case, these could be things like the rejuvenation, the legendary resistance, and the spell casting, as well as turn resistance. So those are what I'm going to list in the tactics. I'm going to put legendary resistance, and that's 3 per day. Now, I'm not writing everything out because I'm super familiar with them. If not, feel free to write them out. And rejuvenation. Again, I'm not writing it out because I know what it is, and I know that they get a 1d10 for when they come back if it has a phylactery. I'm going to put spell casting. And this is the important part. So Lich is an 18th level, which means the spell save DC is a 20, and it has a plus 12 to hit with spells. And then on the back is where I'll put what spells they have or in the notes. And I'll really only list the ones that I'm planning on using, just with reference that there are more. And then finally, turn resistance. So if they're being turned by a cleric, let's say, they'll have advantage on that. So additionally, for an action, they have paralyzing touch, which is a melee spell attack, basically. And if they touch someone, they do cold damage, and then there's a constitution saving throw. So I'm going to put on here for their actions. So one of the things that I note is that this miniature does not have a great axe. It's got just a club. You can see it probably was an axe shaft, but the axe head has long since rotted away. So I may actually adjust that just to fit the mini, because I think that's kind of cool that it has that. And your paralyzing touch is just one attack. So I am going to change this to reflect that. I am going to put 2 attacks, 1 club, and 1 paralyzing touch, or 2 club. C-L-U-B. My writing's small, so it blended together. So I'm going to change this to a great club. And this is still going to be a melee. Now, the Lich stats give us a higher bonus to hit because we're basically leveling this guy up. So this actually did increase from a +9. This one now, I got to do the calculation on this, is a +12 to hit. And this is a 10-foot reach. And we're going to do, instead of the 3d12, we're going to do 3d6 plus 6 bludgeon. And then instead of the rock, because we're not going to be throwing rocks, we're going to add paralyzing touch, which is also a melee spell at a +12 to hit. Now the range on this generally is 5 feet, but because this is a giant, they've got a greater reach. So we do get to extend that to 10-foot reach. And that is 3d6 cold damage and target must succeed a DC 18 con save or be paralyzed for 1 minute. Resave at end of each turn. All right, now we get to decide on the legendary actions. So liches generally have 3 legendary actions. This lich is going to be no different. It is a lich. It is just a frost giant who's become a lich. So even stronger, even more hardy than a human who has become a lich. So in here, I'm going to just give myself a line and put legendary actions. And that's 3. In total. And here's what we can do. A cantrip. We can do an extra paralyzing touch, which costs 2 actions. We can do a frightening gaze. Which costs 2 actions. So we can't do a paralyzing touch and a frightening gaze. And we can do a disrupt life. And this costs 3 actions. And that one there is the one where anything who is not undead within 20 feet of the lich has to do a DC 18 Constitution saving throw or take 6d6 necrotic damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful save. So a pretty nasty hit. Pretty nasty hit. And in the notes section is where I'm going to put the spells. So, cantrips. We have Mage Hand, Prestidigitation, Ray of Frost, which I love thinking about that one being used by the Lich. I love that, so I'm going to put a star by it. And then for first, with 4 slots, we have got Detect Magic, Magic Missile, Shield, and Thunder Wave. I love using that one too. I think I'm going to star that one for their first. Now down here, I'm going to give myself 4 slots, just so I can keep track on the board. And then second level, we have got 3 slots. I'm going to go ahead and mark those down. 3 slots. And we've got Detect Thoughts. We have got Invisibility. We have got Melf's Acid Arrow. And we've got Mirror Image. Now I star one of each because I think of that level, which is the one that's most likely going to be used. And in this case here, I'm actually going to choose Mirror Image. And then third, we also get, I better put some separators in here. We also get 3 slots. So again, just giving myself 3 slots here. Third level, we have Animate Dead, which I love the thought of using that. We've got Counter Spell. I love using the thought of that too. So maybe I'll star this one as well. Who knows? one of those two I'll use for sure. Dispel Magic and Fireball. Now we're not vulnerable to fire, so I'm not going to select that as kind of its default. Let's go to 4th level. We have 3 slots, and we get Blight and Dimension Door. I love the thought of using Blight on some player characters. Now, you can see I've already used the back, so I'm not going to be able to write down on the back. So we still have 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. 5th has 3 slots. 7th, 8th, 9th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th each have 1 slot, but there are a lot more spells there. Pretty much what I'm going to do is recreate this on one with an empty back so I can utilize the space. But our Frost Giant Lich is beginning to take shape. Now, as a GM, when we're doing this exercise, it makes a lot of sense to have some details behind it. And I'm actually going to leave this book open here like this with the sheet here because I want to think about a couple of things. I'm going to grab my, again, normally the back of this I would have empty so I could use it. But because I don't, I'm just going to grab a piece of notebook paper and my pencil. And thinking about my Frost Giant Lich that I've just created, hounded by vultures, this Frost Giant, let's name him, most of my Frost Giant stuff I get from Nordic culture, so we're going to call this one, let's say Sven. Sven gosh, I can't think of a good last name. Tundra Walker. Sven Tundra Walker is our Lich's last name. Now, because I'm not using this in a current campaign, I am already thinking about where I can use this in an adventure or how I could build a campaign around it. When I do that, I will get something published and up on DM's Guild. But in the interim, this is kind of the process that was used to create such memorable creatures such as Lord Soth or Strahd von Zarofich or Azalon. It started with stats and then fleshing them out and making them unique and different. And so for me, Sven, the Frost Giant Lich, really should have more details to it. It didn't just come to be. So I'm just going to write down some notes. Sven, who initially set out to start a clan of their own, encountered, in my world, there are a lot of ancient ruins. As the ages pass and we move from one age to the next, there's huge amounts of destruction and people have to flee. Cities get destroyed, buried in earthquakes or falling into everything from cracks in the crust to just regular pitfalls. Things get buried in lava, whatever the case may be. Ice ages shift, and areas that were previously permafrost and frozen tundra melt off quickly. Other areas that were warm and green and lush and harbors of life get buried in ice and avalanche. So when Sven was going out to start a clan of their own, looking for a place, looking for their own lands, their own hunting grounds, really trying to find a spot in the wilderness that he could claim out and then begin attracting others from other frost giant clans, encountered, let's say, an ancient elven civilization that was lost to time. Now, Sven was a little bit more intelligent, not much more, but a little bit more intelligent than the other frost giants. And as Sven was exploring this area, these runes, this stuff, studying more and more and more, perhaps there was some type of an arcane knowledge. Let's say possibly a relief, a mosaic of elves confronting a lich. Not exactly knowing what he was looking at and seeing, he saw this lich that was in these hundreds of different murals and showing this massive span of time, and that attracted Sven to, and how can I live that long, longer than all of these elves, which, generally for a frost giant wouldn't be, I would say, too out of line, but he wanted even more. Getting into arcane studies, particularly of an elven mage studying the necrotic to better defeat the evil. Sven happened upon the secrets to becoming a lich. And then after hundreds of years and the change to a new age, Sven, now a lich for over 500 years, emerged to take dominance to the tundras and bend the land and inhabitants to his will. So there we've got a bit of backstory about Sven, our frost giant lich. And now all we need to do is write an adventure around Sven as he's emerged from these ancient elven runes, started terrorizing the tundra, which by now we've had the turn of an age. It doesn't even have to be a tundra. It could just be cold climate area now, no longer under the glaciers. And maybe that's one of the things that's set him off. But we've got a good backstory already for this lich about who he is and why he is the way he is. He is neutral evil, so he's not out to, destroy everything in his path and see the world burn. He's possibly a little more lawful evil because he wants things to serve him, right? We said that he's out there to take dominance of the land and bend the land and its inhabitants to his will. Maybe he's not looking for them to serve him, though, as much as they are to guard and protect him and his secrets. But we've already got a great amount of detail added in this. Now all we really need to do, after kind of fleshing him out and everything and thinking about starting an adventure where we can utilize him as, maybe this is a multi-session adventure that's going to take the players a while to get to and confront him. Of course, this is a high CR level creature. I mean, we're looking at a challenge rating of 21. I would even argue that should be up at a 22 or possibly a 23 because of the added stats of his frost giant speed and strength and constitution. You could argue that should be higher. But we allow ourselves some freedom by being able to bring the maximum hit points down to closer to an average, or even if we needed to roll them, we could. Now all we need to do is clean up the miniature and paint it. So in talking about how I would paint this, I actually, upon looking at this figure pretty closely, I'm actually thinking about Ooh, you know what? Initially, I was thinking I'll change these vultures, cut their necks out, basically, and remount their heads to their body and paint them as crows. But I actually like a lich that has familiars. 3 familiars. There are 3 vultures that could attack. I'm going to make a note of that. While you're fighting Sven in the final battle, you also have to confront the familiars, and I'm going to put 3 vultures, which we can pull the stats right out of the appendix for. I believe they are in the Dungeon Master's Guide. If not, they'll be in Volos. But I would paint him. I would use my regular frost giant colors, which in this case would be snow shadow and ghost white, but I would also mix in a little bit of vampiric highlight, and that will give it a little bit more of the like undead tones. Let's see, here's the vampiric highlight. So you've got that little bit of almost a white, it's a yellowy white tone to the skins. And then I love in here how the image has this lich in these rich red robes trimmed with gold. Now our lich, of course, is just in tattered rags and flesh. There is not much decoration in here. However, I will say that we can still dress this figure up. I apologize, I hit the camera there. With making this like a fine fur. So we'll paint the cloth instead of like we would normally do with kind of dirty browns. We can actually paint that out to look like, to make it look a little more elegant and everything. We can actually use oranges, light browns, and off-whites to make it look more like sewn together fox furs, something that's a little more elegant and rich. And then this decoration on the chain, I am guessing that was supposed to be a ship's wheel, because the majority of the Bones products focused on things like Brinewind, the city, the pirate city of Brinewind. I am guessing that is supposed to be a ship's wheel, and it could be a cart wheel as well. But I'm thinking about actually painting that as like decorative jewelry and having it be something with golden spokes and maybe a jewel in the center. Now the texture doesn't really support it, but it's something that we could do. Make it almost like a turquoise, right, on the ring with golden spokes and a sapphire in the center. That still keeps it that cold colors. Those blues are going to be very cold, but more precious stone. And then there are some braids in here where we can work in some reds, possibly in little bits of fabric to keep that richness going. Red is a real rich feeling color, so is purple, kind of that royal color. Then in other areas where we've got exposed bone and flesh kind of rotting out, I would actually make that look more like gangrene and rot than a fresh wound, than a battle wound, anything like that, to show the decay of time. That's the biggest thing, is I want this to look like a decay of time. What's happened here has not been due to battle and resurrection. This has been all due to time. And for some of the things like stitching, you can easily explain that away by, as his body was falling apart, he was actually using the vultures and an invisible servant, maybe, to stitch himself back together. So Sven Tundra Walker, our frost giant lich. Just like that, we have a very cool, interesting, and challenging villain that we can populate in an adventure, make an entire, even a campaign surrounded around it, but an adventure for sure. Even just a one-shot. If we wanted to start this out as a one-shot, we've got enough here that if we want to bring in some high-level player characters to create a one-shot, we've got something that they will never have experienced before. Something that when you pop this down on the table is going to both intrigue and impress your players. And as it starts going through its turn, using things like the Great Club Attack followed by a paralyzing touch is going to throw your characters for a loop. When it counterspells their first Sacred Flame or their Shield or their Bless, or a dimension door, anything like that, as someone tries to flank it and then cast some mirror image, this is just definitely going to throw your players and their characters for a complete loop. All because we started out with a miniature that was cool and a little bit inspiring, thought about it, and built a fantastic character around it. So Sven Tundra Walker, our frost giant lich. I am actually excited to write an adventure on this fellow. I'm excited to use it in a game and to paint this miniature. Of course, it's going to go to the back of the line now because it is the newest one that we're covering. But that's how we get inspiration to create characters and monsters alike, all based on the beautiful sculpt of a miniature. So rather than coming up with something on our own and then trying to match a miniature to the concept that we have, we've taken a miniature, we've created a character that we can use in the game, in this case a monster character, and overall we have done something all based on a miniature that we can then pop in the game at any time. Even before it's painted, we can put it in the game, start utilizing it, and just have a fantastic encounter, one-shot, adventure, even a campaign. So I know we're getting close to the end. I think we've done really well on our time on that one. I am trying to make sure that we have good time management before we log off, just to kind of summarize what we've done in tonight's episode is use a miniature and create a character and build a story off that character that we had inspiration from the miniature. Every Wednesday night we're going to be doing this. Sometimes it's going to be heroes, sometimes it's going to be villains. Who knows? I'm going to try to keep it as random as possible and just grab miniatures about an hour before the show and spend just a couple minutes so I can prepare the right materials, whether that's a character sheet or a monster sheet, and then whether I need to get the player's handbook and possibly a supporting manual, or the monster manual and possibly a supporting manual. So whatever the case may be, I'm going to try to keep it as random as possible. I'm not going to go through my miniatures tonight and pick one for next week. Know that I'm going to do it about an hour before the show. So it's going to be a little bit prepared, but really randomized because I'm not going to spend time thinking about it beforehand other than picking a cool miniature. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was insightful and inspiring for you. After all, that's what we want to do, is really inspire people to have the best experience at the tabletop that we can. Tomorrow, of course, Thursday night is my gaming night, so I'm not going to be doing any Twitch broadcasting. However, I will be back on Friday to give just an adventure log of the week, maybe talk a little bit about next week's schedule, and then back again on Saturday at noon doing some miniature painting. I've got to finish out a black dragon. I've got to finish out a giant stag. I've got to finish out a dire wolf. I've got to start a cleric. I've got to start a tiefling bust. This week I just finished a tiefling bust. I said tiefling bust. I meant drow is what I will be starting, is a drow elf bust on Saturday. I'm hoping that we're able to address all of those miniatures. If you enjoy miniature painting and talking about everything that goes into miniature painting, whether it's materials, how I'm going to use them in the game, how I use them for display, etc., be sure to tune in Saturday at noon live in the studio as we bring it to life with paint. So I hope you enjoyed, and until our next show, have a fantastic evening. Keep gaming. Make sure you drop a comment and let us know, where will your adventures take you. Good night.